Welcome to Dear Art Producer, a podcast connecting the photography and video community with art producers. Drawing on her agency experience some years ago, photography agent Heather Elder penned an open letter to art producers discussing the finer points of working with one another. This podcast takes that idea and will introduce you to different art producers, share the stories of their diverse career paths, explore what it means to stay relevant, and examine industry topics such as marketing, estimating, directing, websites, and more.
Hi, welcome to Dear Art Producer. I am your host, Heather Elder, and today we welcome Sandra Sanchez, a senior art producer at FCB in Chicago. Sandra is grateful every day for being able to partner with creatives to create visual stories. Who would have thought this was actually a job? When she isn't working, she fosters kittens and cats and will never shy away from a good round of karaoke. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm going to introduce you to my friend Liz. She will never pass up a karaoke mic.
That's good to hear. Yeah, a good round is always good to have a partner.
Do you have a song?
I do.
What is it?
It's I usually read the crowd, but
okay.
Janis Joplin, Piece of My Heart.
Oh my gosh.
Get the crowd helping out.
Wow.
I mean, it kills everything.
Okay, that's impressive. Well, hers is Proud Mary.
It's also impressive.
Yep.
So I feel like we would partner pretty well.
And on my Facebook memory a few weeks ago, I had posted something from probably 10 years ago of her singing Proud Mary. And I hesitated. I didn't send it to her. I should have. But she probably would have been like, oh my God, this is, too much history.
but it still works. I mean, I'm sure she slayed. She could probably still slay it now.
Oh my God, she's amazing.
Yeah,
and she gets the room so excited.
That's what it is. You got to make sure it's a crowd pleaser.
Yeah, that's great. Well, welcome today. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit, introduce yourself to us. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in this business. Who gave you your first break?
Yeah.
Why are you here? Where were you before?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I went to school at Arizona State to study journalism. I've always been a really strong writer, so but creative writing was not a thing that my parents were ever going to let me do. It's an impractical major. So I was like, well, journalists write a lot. Let me go to journalism school. And when I was there, I realized that I didn't really want to do news, so I studied PR. And PR was kind of my window into the communications field in general. After I graduated, I was trying to get a job at a PR agency. PR agencies were kind of tough for me to get a job in. I expanded that to marketing agencies and then eventually to advertising agencies. So after I graduated, I moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which I love with all my heart. It has a very special place in my heart.
Did you grow up there?
No, but my very best friend in the world is from there. So
okay.
We met in college, and after we graduated, we both moved out there together.
Nice.
So that was really, really fun. And I was still looking for jobs at that time. And I eventually picked up, after a couple odd jobs here and there, I got an admin job at a marketing agency called Vader Rudder, which does a lot of agriculture marketing.
Uh-huh.
So that was sort of my first break into an agency. And I was just an admin assistant. There was a pretty tight group of pretty young girls who were all out of college, just kind of, that was our first exposure into advertising. And we all kind of covered for each other and covered different departments. I was covering the digital department at the time. But the gal who was covering creative was out for a week on something, and she asked me to help cover for her. And at that time, it was one stock request came in, and I was like, well, I can help with this. And I jumped on it. And I know stock requests are very simple, but I guess I did a pretty good job. It made enough.
You could mess it up.
That's fair. Yeah. Or in the research or something. I forget what it was, but in covering for that gal, I got on Martha Switalski's.
Martha.
I love her so much.
Great.
I got on her radar because she was the only, art buyer at the agency at the time. And she desperately needed help because she was drowning. So she was like, I need an assistant art buyer. I want you to come do it. What do you think? And it was a promotion. It was something new and different. I had no idea what she did, but I was
You got to have her as a mentor?
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, she's the best. She's if you
Hi,
know
Martha.
her. Yeah, no, we love you, Martha. So yeah, she was kind of the one who brought me up and taught me the ways and, imparted all of her wonderful wisdom, not just on the industry, but also to grow as a young woman professionally. I think in advertising, having her as a mentor was awesome. So I learned from her and I was there for a couple of years, and then I bounced over to RPA in Los Angeles, and I got to learn even more from Jen Lamping and her team out there.
Another great
love
mentor.
all those gals.
All those girls are amazing.
And I was there for a little while, and then I most recently came here about 2 years ago. So now I'm in Chicago, and I'm loving it.
That's so great. And here you are at FCB, and we're sitting in this beautiful conference room, and I can see the lake from here.
Right out at beautiful Blue Lake, Michigan.
Yep. And when I heard you guys were in the Hancock Tower, I was like, oh God, please do not be above the 30th floor. The idea of getting in an elevator and having to shoot to the top was not something I was excited about.
Yeah, no one wants to do that. No, we're sitting cool on floor 20.
Okay, good. I can handle that. Yeah. I can handle that. What's something that most people might be surprised to hear about you?
Surprised to hear about me. My first job after college was working for my brother at a startup, actually at like 3 different startups that he had. And I was doing social media marketing for him, which I guess isn't that surprising, but it is the sort of like, I had another life where I was going to be like, I could have, if I hadn't fallen into advertising and caught up with Martha as an assistant art buyer, I had other digital sort of marketing dreams outside of college because I am such a computer nerd and I was always on social media. I was a very early adopter. And I loved social media right at the beginning because that was kind of right when I graduated. So, in another life that was kind of probably.
I love how you said if you didn't fall into advertising, because I think, and I know you specifically mean art production as well, because I say this all the time on the blog, but you don't go to school for this. You don't even know that this exists. You really don't.
It's true.
And a lot of people choose a major and assume that they follow through with that. So they've actually chosen, that's what their path is.
Yep.
I love that this position, like you really had to choose it.
Yeah.
Like you had to seek it out. You had to pay attention to the signs. You had to ask questions and be like, oh, that screams to me. Do you feel like you're in the right position for you?
I do. And I feel like it's really niche, right? Like no one really knows what it is if you're not an agency, or even people in this agency don't necessarily know what we do. And I think even then we're so specialized. And I think that's what's really, for lack of a better word, special about the position and about the work that we get to do every day is that we get to really specialize in this one thing and do it really well. And that gets people to trust us. It gets people to want to work with us a little bit more. It proves our value to the numerous teams here and external vendors. As I'm sure if you've worked with a less than awesome producer, you probably know about it.
Absolutely.
And so that influences your relationship going forward. So we always just try to make everyone's lives a little bit easier.
I think that's so important. We were talking about how many episodes we have, and we've got many, and I've talked to art producers on all ends of the spectrum in terms of how long they've been an art producer. How long have you been one?
I've been doing this for 6 years, going on 7.
Okay, so that's great. So you're
pretty fresh.
You're pretty fresh at this, but I bet you've still seen changes in the industry, given how rapidly things are changing.
Absolutely.
What are some of the changes you've seen?
I think back when I started, there was, I think the biggest thing overall is that, and I think a lot of people have said this, but clients are asking for more stuff for less money. I think that's a challenge that we all have to deal with on either side of the industry. There are too many channels that they need to be present on, and so they need stuff to fill all those channels. But their budgets aren't getting bigger; they're actually getting smaller, and they're spreading the work even thinner across many different agencies. And so that's the first thing, is just the volume of stuff that they're asking us to produce for unfortunately less money. The second thing is kind of tied to that, but it's also something that we're going through here at FCB is integration. So no longer just being an art producer or a broadcast producer, you kind of have to produce everything because every production has a little bit of everything anyway. So I was talking a little bit before about specializing. Now we're actually trying to broaden our specialties to include many different disciplines so that the clients have fewer heads in the room. In order to get a production to move forward. Why have 3 producers in the room when you can just have one? There are pluses and minuses to that, of course, and I had my own aversions to start. But I do think that, it doesn't have to be so black and white. Every production is different, even if they're integrated. Some have more photo or some have more video, and you can assign producers, as appropriate. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with making yourself more marketable and learning a new skill or learning a little more about editorial and learning a little bit more about, for a broadcaster to learn a little bit more about photo usage. Or it's these little things that I think make our world so different and that have kept us separate so long that if you just take a little time and experience to learn them, we all become more well-rounded.
The skills are the same.
Yeah.
And the process and the checklist and the to-do lists, they're all the same.
Right.
It's learning the language and the timeline.
So much of it is language.
A lot of it is.
Yeah, it's true.
And I talked to a lot of freelancers, and there are some freelancers who didn't have the opportunity at their agencies because they worked there forever to diversify.
Totally.
And they're having a hard time out in the world now finding freelance work because they don't have that integrated production. And I know it sounds a little bit like a buzzword, but it really isn't. It's a requirement at a lot of agencies to have both of those skill sets.
You need to just be this kind of integrated content producer. You have to be able to, like you said, the skills are the same. It's just the disciplines and the language and the timelines and sort of the details of each. But a producer's a producer. So why not expand that to be able to deliver more than just a photo shoot or just a broadcast shoot?
Do you find that broadcast producers have a harder time learning the print side of things, or do you find it's the other way around, or it's no hard time at all? It's just kind of like we're all figuring it out.
Yeah, I feel like I'm biased, and I think it's harder for them to learn us. Any art producer I ask would probably say the same, and I don't know why that is. I feel like a big part of it is language, and I think too, so many photographers are obviously also integrating their skill sets to include some motion work in their portfolio as well. And before any of the integrated producer speak at this agency, they would easily come to us and ask us if we needed to add some GIFs to our photo shoot or cinemagraphs to our photo shoot or some, small videos to our photo shoot. And that was pretty easy for us to do because we were working with vendors who understood it and producers and reps who understood it. So they were able to kind of give us a window into that. Versus when you're working, in my opinion, on a larger production from a broadcast side and you want to add some photo to it, it kind of, for lack of a better term, gets pawned off.
Right.
To a second shooter, to the line producer to worry about it.
Right. And it's very hard to get access to that producer to answer questions. Yes. Can we share casting? Can we share location? Can we share this? And there feels like a little bit of a wall.
Yes, I would agree. And I think it's understandable because oftentimes those productions are just so much bigger. There's so many moving parts, and it's easy to consider, the photography to just be a very small part of it. But what I like to remind people when we do come up against that kind of friction or that wall on our part as well is to just look at the client ask and look at the assets that they're asking for. And perhaps this is unfair, but it's like, what's going to live longer? Like if they need all these print assets for a huge campaign, and then also 2 15-second videos that are going to be in market for slightly less time, like where do you want to invest the time in production to make sure they're having assets that are going to live long enough? I never want to weight the assets that we're trying to walk away from a production, but sometimes it's like, if you pawn this off, like this is almost the bigger piece, even though it's the one that's simpler because it's photo and not broadcast, and helping that, those conversations and that lens of understanding is super helpful when we're connecting with producers here internally.
I find that when I get a phone call from a broadcast producer who's doing print, it's an interesting conversation because there's so many print producers that I know and have relationships with. And even if I didn't know them and they called me, like we hadn't worked together or whatever, we know of each other. Right. So there's this unsaid relationship, and respect isn't the right word, but we absolutely understand each other's job.
It's an understanding. It's a close network. It's an understanding.
Exactly. So, but when the broadcast producer comes in and is trying, there's no relationship there yet. Like we're building it. We are a little bit like speaking different languages and trying to learn each other's languages. So it's not that it's a rocky thing, but it's something that I'm recognizing like, oh, okay, I need to remember just because they're a producer doesn't necessarily mean they get how we're doing things, and doesn't necessarily mean the way I'm doing things are right. Like I need to be open to whatever this new relationship will bring. Yeah, it's all learning. It's learnings on both sides of the coin. And if you approach someone who's speaking a different language, then you try to find that common ground. And then you learn the tidbits that kind of help you get to where you need to go together. I think there's clear discomfort, I think, in that initial sort of trying to figure things out phase, because when you are working with just an art producer who does speak your language, it's just so fluid, and we're finishing each other's sentences. It's true. Not every job is standard, but there's a expected flow of things, right? And again, the language is there, that shared vocabulary. Even just
having broadcast producers talk to me about buyouts. I mean, they talk about buyouts all the time. And I was like, oh, you mean usage? Like, it's just little things like that where they're like, we want a 2-year buyout. And I'm like, then that's not a buyout.
Right.
and little things like that where even that can trip you up and, cause a lot of misunderstandings that just make the bidding process a little bit harder. So everyone, I'm sure, probably gets a little bit easier and you learn a little bit more and take it with you to the next one. That's sort of the space we're in right now of trying to, luckily the productions are coming in fast enough to where I think the learnings will come pretty quickly as well, because, we can just take it over to the next one as it comes and hopefully make it more fluid.
Are every one of your jobs including some sort of motion now?
Not everyone, no. I think we just recently are working toward an integrated model here at FCB. And before we did, it was me and 2 other art buyers who were here, an associate and a mid-level. And now we're part of a group of 30 producers, and the rest of them were broadcast and post. So,
and you're not always doing photo shoots, right? You might, create the asset through stock or
correct. It's not always a large production. Okay. I think that the projects will come through, and it could just be some stock research, and we're doing it that way. We do illustrations, we do a little bit of CG. We have internal resources here that we can partner with to help the creative solve problems pretty efficiently. And then, it would be with the actual photo shoot productions as well. So there's like bits and pieces, and more, I think the larger the production, you're never seeing a large production that's just a photo shoot anymore. It's got to have some other
absolutely. That's the same thing with us.
Yes. There's always an additional ask because, again, more for less, right? They're trying to make sure they're maximizing. If we're going to have a campaign with all these assets and we're hiring these 4 models for a photo shoot, we better stick them in something else as well so that we're having consistent assets.
How do you find the people that you're going to trust with your big productions?
It's a fantastic question. I'm like, I don't know that I have yet. No, I haven't had too many super large productions. Like I can count on one hand how many I've had that have had a large enough video component to where I've been thinking, okay, is this person a strong enough photographer and director? Do they have the reel to support the level of motion we're asking them to do? How I'm finding those people, I mean, luckily for me, my photographer roster that I'm constantly updating and going to, I mean, more and more of these folks are adding motion to their portfolios anyway, by necessity.
Absolutely.
So we're getting a look into how deep they can go into things. I go to a lot of rep websites and sort of, I kind of trust the reps that I know very well to curate the right portfolios for the right job, depending on the photographer and their expertise. Sometimes I think I'm wary of people, and I've noticed this before, where you go to a photographer's website, they have a motion section and there's one video and it's a GIF. Right. And it's a stop motion GIF, and that's kind of all they have. Right. Because I think they feel like they just need to check that box, which is understandable. But at the same time, it doesn't do them any favors to just check that box, because that's not what we're looking for.
It would almost be better to say coming soon.
Correct.
Working on it. Ask me where I am in the process.
Correct. Yeah. I would agree. Yeah. I think, because if we do, see a motion section that just has GIFs or cinemagraphs or whatever, which are motion, don't get me wrong, but, oftentimes we're looking for, longer form video. And when we see that section underdeveloped, that part of the portfolio underdeveloped, we just feel like they're not ready. And maybe they could be if they just showed different work, but it's a hard line to toe, because you also don't want to be, I can understand from an artist's point of view, you don't want to be disqualified just because you don't have something to show from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about websites.
Yeah.
So what makes a good website for you? What's super annoying to you?
What makes a good website? I think something, so you have to think about it from my point of view.
Absolutely.
And we're, we got a lot going on, busy days. The first thing is something clean and clear, not muddied up with too many effects or strange organization or slow loading pages. We kind of want to be able to see information really quickly, to include visual information. So make sure your pictures load quickly, at a good quality. Make sure there are no effects that may be artistic but can slow things down a little bit. It's sort of like, I know people have said it on the podcast before, like if it takes an extra second, I'm going to move on.
Out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unfortunately a pretty quick game. Something I personally like too, from both photographer websites and rep websites, is just the ability to make sure that I can have the option to do thumbnails. If I'm trying to get a broad overview of a person's work, clicking through one photo at a time.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
It's going to be too time consuming, and it's not going to, I'm just able to do it better if I'm able to look at the thumbnails.
I prefer to start with the thumbnails and then click on one and then click through if you want.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I think is really, I think that's really keen. And people are doing that. I think, you know, clicking in and seeing a larger photo, I understand wanting to put the larger photo first, or only the large photo because of the quality, and you want to make sure people are seeing it. But at the same time, if someone is looking to hire you, they want their time is limited, and they're going to want a quicker read of an overview of your work. So thumbnails are super helpful. That's my one thing that I'm finding on most websites, but if I don't find it, I get a little peeved.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Okay, what about going back to getting your attention?
Yeah.
Do you use online resources? Do you get mailers, email blasts?
Yeah.
What of those things?
We get a little bit of everything, and I think I over the years have developed a pretty good system of sort of, you know, receiving, saving, sorting, and filing so that I can refer to it later. For email promos, most of them I have a rule set up in my email, so it goes into this one folder, and they stay unread until I look at them.
And what's the rule?
I think,
like, how do you know?
Yeah.
How does it know that you're?
So there's a couple things. I think, like, IT in this building has a thing where it puts external on the subject line of things if it's not from an internal email address. So I think I put that on there, and then, like, if the email contains the word unsubscribe, that catches most of them, right? They're usually done through those mailing systems. So that'll catch most of them, not all of them. Sometimes people email me directly or something else. But then I have this promo folder that I usually I try to get to it every day, if not every couple days. And it just fills up, you know, I'll have 200 by the end of the second day. And then if in the afternoon, if I have a minute, I'll go through and kind of click through and see, like, you know, sometimes they're quicker clicks than others. Sometimes things are more relevant to the work I do or the work I'm currently looking for than others. But it's a nice place to just kind of keep everything in one place. And what's nice too, a well-crafted mailer has the visuals that we need so that they can get obviously visual storytellers need that attention. But also they'll have some text in there, and I can search those promos. So if I need, you know, it doesn't work all the time, but sometimes a good way to narrow down if I'm not able to sort them into individual folders like food or lifestyle or fashion or whatever, I can just search the word. So I can search food photographer. I can search, you know, I can search a city if I need to, or if I only know a first name and not a last name, et cetera. Like, I can kind of use that promo folder as a master reference to search through.
Yeah, that's great.
And we receive the mail promos as well. And me and the other art buyers here, and we try to keep them and sort through them. I have my associate go through those probably once a quarter to try to do a refresh, because we all usually get the same ones, and we keep the ones we like and don't like. And we've moved spaces a couple times, but at our more permanent space, when our desks were all together, we had a filing cabinet that we separated things into folders. So sometimes—
That's great. You still have that.
We do. Yeah. And I think it seems tedious in the moment, but then the second a creative comes by and is like, do you know of any X photographers and you know, architecture photographers, and they can come in and we can give them our recommendations, but also there's an entire folder dedicated to architecture in this file cabinet that they can look through at their leisure. They can see the photos. They can see if it's exactly what they want or not want.
Which is nice. Like, it's very old school, but it's really nice because we are in front of our computers all day long. And looking links and clicking on links, and, you know, sometimes it's nice just to, like, can I just see them in front of me? And you get a sense.
It's something I think too about, like, absorbing information through a tactile experience. I think somehow sticks a little bit more, depending on the type of learner you are. But I know that some the creatives who have come, and there have been a handful, they've really appreciated that.
Well, you're fortunate you have the space to save it, right?
Yeah.
I was just at an agency where the art producer said, like, I have nowhere to keep it. I have a dedicated desk, but I have no file cabinet. So what I've been doing is, we have these metal walls, and I hang them up on the metal walls so that people can see them. And then I pull them down and replace them with others. But some agencies don't even let you do that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was really, RPA in Los Angeles, where I was previously, had a really nice system of kind of was like an ongoing project, but they would put the promos up on the wall and they would kind of organize them in an artful way. Or we had an intern one summer who came and did this whole color wall, and it was just moving in value across the wall. And it was
great.
Absolutely stunning. Like she filled the entire wall because we had enough of the promos to do that. And so it became, like this section of promo pieces for these photographers, but also like in its entirety, this kind of art piece, which was really cool and special to have around. And it's just like, it's like dressing up instead of like plain walls. It's just kind of nice to put some art up. I mean, that's kind of what the promos are for, right?
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
Look at something pretty.
What about Instagram? Photographers are always asking me to ask that. Yeah,
that's a good one. I do think that I personally am not looking to Instagram to find my photographers. I don't start there. But if I'm on the path down looking for a photographer and I see that they have an Instagram, then I'll click on it. So if I'm on their website and I see they have an Instagram, I'll go that way versus doing any kind of searching or looking on actual Instagram. It is always nice to see a well-curated feed, whether the job calls for social or Instagram or influencer stuff or not, just because no matter what, it's probably going to end up on social anyway. And so seeing that person's body of work or just their lens and point of view and how they're able to make the feed look nice is sort of helpful so they understand how, art is going to translate into the social space.
That is so important, I think.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think so too.
If your profile is private and a photographer reached out to you to follow you, would you accept that or only if you knew them?
Personally, if I knew them, my profile is actually public, and even then, I don't always follow back.
Right.
For that reason, one way to kind of problem solve that for our department is we have a department Instagram. And I know that a lot of agencies have been kind of doing that as well. You guys
are great at your...
We have a lot of fun, some agencies are spot on and have really like great branding and like they post much more regularly. We kind of cover the reviews. I'm hoping to get better at that in the next year or two. But that's kind of a way where we can, it's all of we share the login and it's kind of all of our professional Instagram, right? So if we want to go in, a lot of people follow us there. We try to follow back everyone there. And then that's also sometimes if we need a resource for something that's really specifically social or we want to dive into something a little bit more, we can connect people that way and look through our followers.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's great.
It's been super fun.
Let's talk about the estimating process here.
Yes, sure.
It starts with what? Do you get a brief? Do you have to create the scope? Like where does it begin here?
Usually, if I'm lucky, and it's been happening more and more often, I'm starting to like train the teams. It's to involve us as early as possible. So I'm
hearing that more and more too.
Yeah, I think that we've asked for it long enough.
Yeah,
and then finally it's like,
happening.
Get us in the room. It's just the best way. I mean, things are just a little bit smoother for everyone involved if we're involved up front because, we never want to take away a creative's ability to concept something amazing. It's all about problem solving, right? So, if we know the timing and budget constraints ahead of time and we're in that briefing room, we can work with the creatives to come up with ways to make their vision come to life that aren't going to feel limiting to them, but that are going to be realistic to the client with the timeline and budget that they're up against. If we don't come into things until a concept is sold and they tell us a timeline and a budget and a concept that's unfortunately impossible in that realm, someone's going to be disappointed. We're going to have to, I'd rather make the concessions beforehand before the client even knows it's a concession.
Right.
And then they feel like they've gotten everything versus having to take things away or deliver things later or ask for more money or whatever the case is. If you do any of those three things, someone's disappointed. So we try to avoid doing that as much as possible. And we're able to avoid doing that if we're at the table a little bit earlier. So more and more often we're invited to the brief where a lot of times we take a little bit of a backseat because obviously that's for the concept to come to life and the creatives to come up with what they want to do to solve that brief. And they can come to us with questions about, what, sometimes they'll just ask us like, what are cool things a beverage client comes to mind, like what kind of cool things have you seen from the beverage photographers in the city? Because we know the shoot has to stay local because we know it's a little bit reined in on the budget. So what kind of what were the coolest things you're seeing from the beverage photographers in the city? And we have those relationships and we keep a pretty good pulse on those things. So we're able to work with them and show them some idea starters of where they could take the way they can answer the brief. So we'll start there. And then once a concept is sold in and approved, hopefully with our with our help, or I don't want to say blessing, but with our knowledge of what's sold and approved, the client will approve the concept, and then they'll come to us usually concurrently to start asking us for what artists we think could work within this concept. So they get
Are the clients asking you that, or the
creatives? The creatives. Yeah. Once the client approves it, creatives will come to us and say, "This is what we're doing." We kind of have. Sometimes they'll come to us with some people in mind. We kind of like something like this person. Who else does what this person?
Where do you
doing?
think they find their people?
Because
I know the opportunity exists with portfolio shows. I know it exists where they get the email blasts and they can look online as well.
Yeah.
But I don't often hear a lot of feedback from the creatives of like, "Ooh, I saw you here." So where do you think they're searching when they're...
It's a good question. I should ask that more often from them too, just because I'm curious. I think a lot of times, and I could be way off base, but I have a feeling a lot of times it kind of comes from word of mouth among the other creatives. So they're all on their individual client teams, but they're all friends with each other. So if they work on a lifestyle brand, but they know somebody on a beverage team and they need a good,
they'll ask
beverage shooter, who have you had, they'll ask, who have you had a really good experience with, or who's doing really cool stuff that maybe you haven't worked with yet, but wanted to work with, or they'll kind of ask each other for those recommendations based on experience from previous bidding or previous jobs.
And how does that work in your department? I know you probably ask each other, but do you ever ask outside of your department to other agencies or other buyers that you know?
Sometimes, yeah. I depending on how specialized the concept is, but sometimes it is quite specific what they're looking for. But something came up the other day where we needed an artist who had shot something very specific in a specific city, and that artist had to be from a specific ethnic background. And so it was a lot of we had to check a lot of boxes in order to get some options in front of the creatives. And that when that happens, then we can go through and we just start asking each other, and then other producers, freelance art producers that we might have known or worked with in the past, old coworkers that we worked with at other agencies. Like I said, it's a really tight-knit network. I've got I'm lucky to have half a dozen art producers in my text that I can kind of run things by. Coming from RPA to here, my team shrunk tremendously. RPA has a really great, big team that they work on out there, which is kind of cool. When I left, I think they had about 8 or 9. And I came here and it was a team of 3, including me. So me and 2 other gals, which has been definitely an adjustment. But the best thing is when we all sit together and you're just going through the day and it's like, wait, who do you know who shot that one thing?
Your shared knowledge is incredible.
You just speak up and ask a random question and someone can chime in, or even if it's you're venting about something, it's you're all going through the same thing. So I can't place enough value in that. It's so, it just helps our jobs go so much easier. Because again, what we do is so specialized and niche that only we sort of know our struggles, right?
It's true.
And only we know the kinds of things that we're looking for. So that artist sharing and artist searching, or even if your creatives have a recommendation of what artists they want to work with, and you've never worked with them before, but you know that it's a specifically challenging production, you might go and ask
want to do your research on that.
Who's worked with this person before? How did it go? What producer did they use? How would you recommend this person working under a crazy timeline or whatever? And you'll get that information. That feedback's so valuable because at least
do you ever direct who you would like the producer to be on a job, or do you just always let the photographer choose?
9 times out of 10, I let the photographer choose. There have been jobs in the past where the creatives have felt very strongly about their recommended photographer on a job, but the costs were just too high. And I knew of a producer or 2 who could do things a little bit more nimbly than the recommended producer on the job. So I would ask the rep if they were willing to bid the job, marry photographer with my recommended producer. And 9 times out of 10, they're willing to do that.
But then the photographer handles the production estimate. It's not that you're doing the production with the producer, right?
Correct. It still ends up being that they'll give me a bid for the whole production. They work it out together with the producer I recommend.
It's not interesting. There's been a few cases this year where we've actually been asked if we would be okay with working with a certain producer. And then the art producer manages the producer, the photo shoot producer, gets the numbers to where they need to be.
And just gets a photo bid from you.
And then gets a photo bid from us.
Interesting.
But the challenge in those situations were that we didn't have a lot of access to the photo producer. So how do I know that how do you know that my approach is the same for all? Is that a producer's approach the same for all three? So it was a little bit awkward.
Yeah.
We figured it out,
Yeah.
and we made sure we were incredibly clear on what our approach was, and it was up to them to make sure our numbers matched that.
Yeah.
But I did find that interesting, and I asked the buyer why it was that way. She's like, I just trust this producer so much. I want to work with her, and this is my go-to person.
Yeah.
And
I can definitely understand that. I can definitely understand. Like, I've got, my favorite producers. Everyone's got their people who've made their jobs a breeze and who they trust to work under, specific conditions or whatever.
That can do that as well.
Correct. Yeah. And I think, this job is all about relationships, right? I mean, you're asking where you're finding people, who you're finding people from, how you're marketing or discovering people. All of the methods that we talked about are great, but nothing is going to beat an existing relationship.
Nothing is going to beat it.
Nothing's going to beat the relationship.
Nothing. And I remember years ago when I was encouraging my photographers to go out there, and their response, rightfully so at the time, was, well, you're my rep. You're supposed to do that. And I'm like, it doesn't exist. It's not like that anymore. There's too many of you out there. So they need to get to know you. If there's a tie on the table, and they've met one person but haven't met you, they might go with the person that they've met.
It's true. It's enough of a leg up sometimes when things are, the field is hyper competitive. Like it's understandable, and so it's so important for artists to be willing, I think, to take that extra step to do the meeting. And so many of them do now. We're so lucky that we get to meet a lot of artists, especially here in Chicago. They're coming through and they come say hi, and we love it. But that meeting can make or break a job for you. If all things being equal, like you said, they're probably going to go with the person that they've had a conversation with. And not always just about work too. I mean, this is an awesome conversation because we're talking about a little bit of everything, but we just met a photographer earlier today, and he is from San Diego, and I was born in San Diego. So we connected on that a little bit.
Exactly.
And it's just those like hints of personal connection that are going to just take you above and beyond the competition every time.
Every time. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so that also is kind of holds true for the creative call. I mean, that is incredibly important to nail in a personable, informative, enthusiastic, attentive, focused sort of way. And I think the conditions that allow for that nowadays are really hard, right? The photographers racing to the airport, they're working on a job, you're distracted by something else. Like everybody's like, they're on set, so those things, those creative calls are hard to make right.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that when I started doing this, the creative call was almost a nuisance to me because I didn't understand it, right? I was just coming out and it was like, my creatives put together this awesome like briefing document. I can just give them this deck that gives them all the background they need on the campaign, the shot list, all the detail they can possibly ask. Why do we have to talk through this? Like half of my first creative calls were the creatives just reading their deck. And I was like, they can just read. Do you know what I mean?
I complain about all that time. I'm like, that's not a creative call.
I know. It's like we can read it.
It's like a script reading.
Don't read your presentations.
Right.
But if it's a junior creative, but whatever. Sometimes that would happen really early on. So I was like, what is the point of this call? This is a nuisance to us. It's a nuisance to this poor photographer who's probably traveling or whatever. Why do they have to hop on the phone with us? And again, Martha was like, I learned from my mentors, and they're just like, it's a job interview, and that's your one opportunity for not just you to connect with that person if you've never met them, but also the creatives, because the creatives are trusting their vision in this artist to deliver. And that's a really special partnership. And if you don't know that person or feel like you have the possibility of having a rapport with that person as you move into a working relationship, it's going to be bad. It's going to fall apart. And that's why it's so hard to nail, I think, because it's this interesting balance of I don't want to say it's like a job interview to like be someone's friend.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
No, that's a great way to put it.
We've seen the portfolio. We know that you've got the chops.
That's the given. At this point, you wouldn't even be in this process.
We wouldn't even be
at
talking
this point
exactly
if you didn't have the work. So I feel like a lot of photographers get caught up in, well, my work is great. They should hire me. And I'm like, okay, your work is great. That's why you're being considered. So now we're not even going to talk about the work anymore.
Yeah.
Like, let's get to know you. Let's get to know your approach. Let's hear what you're going to do. How do you align with the brand?
Yep.
And that's the treatment and the creative call are the two places that they really get a chance to shine.
It's true.
And I try and share with photographers in my group, and they're all pretty good at the call, and outside photographers when I talk to them that a lot of times the call will be set up where someone is taking you through. And that's important. Like what you read and what you interpret when you hear something are different, and it gives you an opportunity to listen. True. But where I would love to see more conversation happen around what is it on my website that you saw that made you think I'd be right for this job? What is it that you know about me that made you choose me? Yeah. So then the photographer has an opening to be like, oh, that shot. Yep. Awesome. I get it. Let's talk a little bit about that and how I can do that for you in your own client's way on this
it's
shoot.
So true. Yeah.
So I think sometimes everybody's thinking about getting through the shot list and making sure from an executional point of view, we're all on the same page.
Any questions, right? It's like, you understand what we're asking.
And nobody asks those other bigger, and I'm exaggerating here. People do ask them.
Yeah.
But I wish there was more of the attention was more on that because you and I could go through the shot list.
Correct.
And I could, and you and I would do it in about 5 minutes and we'd be like, got it. Okay.
That's
how many talent, how many days,
right? Like I'm telling you what I need to get. It's what are you going to bring to this vision? And I think I totally understand the challenge that presents to photographers because it's a precarious position to be in where it's like, my work's already sold me in. You don't want to say the wrong thing. No. I don't think you can really say anything wrong, but as long as you're engaged, and I think that's a really good, tactic, Heather, that window into like, what is it about my work that interested you in this job, in me for this job. And that's such a good way to just start the conversation of like, other than what we're asking you to do, like, what else can you bring to it? Or what excites you about this concept? Yeah. Like hearing someone who's super into delivering on a job. I mean,
well, and I train my train's a weird word, but like I consult with my photographers. I, connect with them on this idea over and over that their images can't speak for themselves anymore. Yeah. So you're no longer just a category. What is your brand? Who are you as a photographer? What are your values? What are your beliefs? What are the things that you've brought to your photography that they've appealed to the creatives? Yeah. So now you can talk about those and align those with the brand. Yep. That you're being considered for. Yep. So are you an outdoor photographer and are you being considered for an outdoor brand? Mm-hmm. What is it that made you choose outdoor photography? Why is it that do you value curiosity? Yep. And one of Andy Anderson's values is curiosity. Yeah. So if he values that, how does that translate? Yep. And he has to figure out a way to weave that into that conversation without sounding like, hey, by the way, I'm a curious guy.
It's weird. It's a really hard skill.
It's a hard skill.
I think of the best creative calls that I've had, and these photographers are so experienced, I think, at being personable and being very natural on the call while still pointing to the strengths in their aesthetic, in their approach, in their own life that, again, align with that brand. And it can't feel salesy. It's such a hard... Yeah. No one wants to feel like they're being sold something. And I think it's hard because we are at work, but I need a personal connection from you. It's really similar if you kind of think about it like from an artist's point of view. It's similar to the stuff that you want your photos to do, right? Is you kind of need it to connect with someone beyond just being beautiful. And you want to connect with someone at work beyond just being transactional. You kind of need it to be something beyond that because you're not going to stick out otherwise. And I get it. It's hard. It's a lot of investment and practice to get to that point. It's specifically on the creative call. We haven't even talked about treatments yet. But I think, from where I'm sitting and from what I see the creatives, when we hang up the phone on that creative call, I'm having an instant conversation with my creative saying, what'd you think of that? And it's always, I've gotten feedback, positive and negative. And it's never about like, they get the shot list or they don't get the shot list. It's kind of like, did they get the concept? Did they understand the brand?
Or you hang up and they're like, that was weird.
Or they hang up and that was weird.
Like
that's my favorite. But
sometimes we hang up and we're like, okay, that was kind of weird. Don't you think that was weird?
It was a little bit weird. I know. And then that's what you want to avoid. And it just takes practice. Like it's so hard, but it just takes practice.
Well, there's so many people like, we're not seeing each other. We're not sitting around a table.
I hate conference calls.
And then people are talking over each other.
I know, it's always awkward. It's a little bit awkward. There's a delay. I was doing a creative call. I know someone was like traveling abroad, but it was a pretty big job and we needed to get him on a creative call. So he was so, gracious and hopped on the phone, but it was probably like 4 a.m. his time or something ridiculous. And it was an international phone call number and just the delay of like, we had to pause 6 seconds after we said everything so that he could reply. It's rough. I hate conference calls.
Have you ever done like a Google Hangout or a FaceTime or a Zoom meeting or any of those like FaceTime kind of calls?
I would love to. I think it's so helpful to be able to see even just what we're doing right now. Like you read body language and you can see when someone's done talking, so you don't feel like you're going to talk over somebody.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have that visual cue, it just makes it so much harder. I haven't done very much of that. At my first agency, we used GoToMeeting, and sometimes we would do sort of the video conferencing on that. But I also think that, like, this is a whole other conversation, but there's so many tools now that sometimes, like, stripping all that down and just getting on the phone is almost easier versus like you have to have this software and you have to have this software. Oh, I'm not on Gmail, I can't do that. In the sense of being kind of messy. Everyone's got a phone, so you can kind of hop on a phone pretty easily.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. Mm-hmm. We only have a few minutes left, but maybe just give me a couple of like summary points on what you think make up a good treatment.
Treatment. I think, like we touched on before, we're already familiar with your work. So I think the imagery still has, including imagery, I think still has to be strong, but it really has to be focused on relating to what the concept is and what the project is, and show off things that are similar to the approach you want to bring to the job. The write-up is just as important. I mean, when I first started, I was like, again, another waste of time, right? It's like another thing we're asking these poor photographers to do, like just, to me, I'm like
to read it.
It was a whole thing. But as I've gone forward and as I've worked with more and more creatives at varying levels, they do read those. They take it to heart. It's just another opportunity for you to to show what you can bring to the project. Mm-hmm. We know what you can bring to photography. We know your portfolio already. What can you do that's special to this that we're asking you to do? And what gets you excited about it? And maybe if there's another thing I'd like to see is if there's a specific challenge that we know we're up against, right? A very long shot list and we can only do one day, for example. What approach are you going to take and how are you going to help us solve that problem? Sometimes, we'll see write-ups that lean on previous experience to show they've done it a certain way before. They've worked with the second shooter before. They're going to light things a certain way to help evoke a certain emotion that'll help with the concept. Those write-ups matter.
They matter.
And when I receive them and pass those off to my creatives, again, when I first started, I was like, no one's reading this, but then I'll follow up with them 2 days later and they're just like, you have no idea how good this treatment is. Like, you can really read it in his words. He or she is really, really passionate about what we want to do. And it makes all the difference. So I think showing the passion and enthusiasm for the concept in the write-up is huge. And then if you're going to include visuals, which obviously you should, don't just be pulls from your website. We've seen those that'll relate. If you have other work that you are able to show or personal products you're able to show, that lend themselves to the concept, then all the better. It's just more visual ammo for the creatives to look at.
One thing I learned by doing this podcast is I think I just assumed that the treatments were always shared with the client. And not all of them are at some agencies. And sometimes it's just a page that's sent, or sometimes it's not anything at all. Yep. And people take something of it and put it in their own words for their own kind of presentation to their clients.
Yeah, so, I've seen it done a couple different ways depending on the job. Yeah, sometimes it'll go to clients, sometimes it won't.
Well, you've been incredibly articulate and insightful and offered really, really great things. I always end the podcast, though, asking people, I think it's very insightful. If you didn't do this, what would you do?
If I weren't doing art production and on my more stressful and low days, I think about this often.
Everybody says, "Oh, I know."
I'm like, I already know. I would be working with animals, hands down. I love animals so much. We talked about me fostering before. I foster cats and kittens because my apartment doesn't let me have dogs. But if I could have dogs, I would. I just don't have the time to own an animal right now, and I travel a lot, so it doesn't really help. But working at a shelter, working for a shelter, running a shelter, when I was a kid, I have family in Puerto Rico, and we would talk a little bit. When you go to Puerto Rico, you can see they've got all these homeless beach dogs, right? They're all over the place. And I was like, if only I could give them shots in a bath and then give them a home, right? Like, that's all I want to do. Maybe they don't even want it, but it's like, it's a dog, it deserves some love. So running a shelter for homeless dogs in Puerto Rico, I think is my official answer whenever someone asks me
if you do that, I'll introduce you to my daughter, because I tell her all the time, oh my gosh, Casey, we have 2 Goldens. I'm like, you should breed Goldens. And she always says, Mom, I'd never give them away. So I couldn't. And I was like, okay, never mind. Don't breed Goldens. So
just be a crazy dog lady. She'll be in a ranch. And
literally, she would be the crazy dog lady. But she'd be good at it. She and I would be friends. You would absolutely be friends. So, but this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
This was a lovely conversation.
Really was fantastic. I feel like I've gotten to know you a little bit better. I've so enjoyed hearing about your career path, and a little shout out to Martha.
Yeah, we love you, Martha. Exactly. Jen, we love you too. Jen Lamping.
And Jen, oh my gosh, you had amazing mentors.
I did, yeah.
Well, thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. In an industry where the rules are always changing, it's helpful to hear from those on the front line. Heather Elder is the visionary behind notesfromarepsjournal.com. Visit her website for industry updates, stunning photography and video, and the artist behind the work.